So how many folks here were on the CAC? Okay, so that's a pretty good showing. Appreciate that, all that work, and that you're still on your feet. And how about the LOCUS strategy leaders? Okay, great. So we have a pretty good group there. And how many folks have been working with the Union Square Neighborhood Council Working Group? Okay, so really good mix of folks in the room and some continuity among all of them. So this meeting really has just two sections. So the first section, because not everybody has been participating fully the last couple months, thought we would ask the city to give a brief update on some recent happenings, things like zoning, maybe the Green Line contribution. If any of you have an extra $50 million, that would really be appreciated. A few other updates like that, and then we'll go right into a presentation of where all the folks who've been working on the future Union Square Neighborhood Council have gotten to, and so hopefully everybody's ready to give that their full attention and coalesce on a great future. So I think Sue is going to do you're going to give the presentation. Are you going to sit at the computer too?
Hi everyone, my name is Sue Thomas. I'm the Senior Economic Development Planner with OSPCD. Wanted to give you guys a few updates with LOCUS and then also some of the meetings that are happening this week and next week with Union Square. So Union Square update, I'm sure most of you know, but if you don't, everything regarding to Union Square, you can find it under www.somervillema.gov/Union Square. And then everything pertaining to Union Square zoning, it's /Union Square zoning. So all of the documents that you need to catch up on or any updates, it'll all be on those sites. LOCUS update. So spoke with LOCUS this morning and it sounds like they've got some money left over, which is about $5,000 to $7,000. It's available through a grant. So ideally, it's really to help with the formation of the neighborhood council. So we wanted to make sure that you guys knew of that money. So basically the condition would be that once it is recognized by the Board of Aldermen, it'll help through, forming the nonprofit organization, whether it be staff time, whether it be paperwork, whatever it might be that you need that is available to you. If that's not the case, the city could also use it towards the Community Benefits Committee, whatever administrative cost that costs as well. So that is available to everyone. The social equity scan that LOCUS has been talking about forever. So that is actually complete. If you guys are familiar with the Boston's walk-up study that they had done, so it's basically the social equity of balancing the economic, environmental, and social equity for the development here in Union Square. They used, their primary document that they used was the Union Square plan, and of course what was dated from the LOCUS benefits as well. So from that, they used three basics that they talked about as business as usual, which is basically what's current right now, the development trajectory, and then the partial implementation, so if it's like halfway through the neighborhood plan or only portions of it. Then you've got the full implementation, which is aggressive redevelopment towards that is in tune with the neighborhood plan. Their findings right now is projections suggest that implementing the neighborhood plan would move Somerville from the front of the pack to a class of its own in terms of social equity. Full implementation in particular would make a dramatic difference for affordability, primarily by reducing the number of cost-burdened households. So that report, we should hopefully have it in about 2 weeks. To hold me to that, they have it sort of in numbers form. They're trying to make it more user-friendly. So once that's complete, we will definitely share it out to all of the LOCUS groups, CAC, Neighborhood Council, and then to the public as well. And if there's any questions, we can answer those as well. City update, the SRA and US2 Master Land Use Decision Agreement was approved on April 27th. The Board of Aldermen are continuing the Union Square zoning discussions. The next meeting will be May 17th. The SRA, this is just a kind of quick note, SRA and BOA vote approval before May 31st. The covenant would go into effect, so it's along with the zoning. They're not two separate timelines. The Board of Aldermen are continuing these community benefits ordinance discussions. That meeting is this Thursday with the Legislative Matters Committee. So any input, any thoughts that you have, please come to that meeting just to know more about the ordinance, or Tom and I are also available after the meeting if you guys have any questions on that. Another note to the Somerville utility and streetscape improvements. The first meeting on that is Wednesday on May 18th. Basically going to talk about their schedule, where they are with that. The Transportation and Infrastructure Department will tell you much more about this, but in quick highlights, it's basically 3 full construction seasons, 3 years if we actually start by spring. Construction documents are nearly complete, and it can start about 3 months after approval of the Board of Aldermen. So that process will start with the Board of Aldermen once everything is done with the zoning, but it will be introduced at that time too. So if anyone has any questions, Tom and I are available at the end of the meeting, and we can hopefully answer those for you. Thanks.
Are there questions? Any questions? No. Okay. So the 17th is actually Wednesday and the 18th Thursday. That's okay. So we're ahead of schedule. Are you guys ready to go? Okay. Yep. Do you want to sit at the table or do you want to speak from here? Yeah, it's nice. Just be careful. Be especially careful when you walk across the wire that goes to the projector, okay?
Am I? Oh, yeah?
Yeah, she does.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tori Antonino. Thank you for being here at another city meeting. And so I just wanted to start by thanking the city for helping with this process, in fact, initiating it. But I want to give the most thanks to all the citizens, residents, non-residents in this room who have been to all these meetings, slogging through, and have gotten us to this point we are now, which is presenting the neighborhood council. So to put a finer point on the work you guys did, I want to say that the CAC, Citizens Advisory Committee, they have held 26 meetings and counting. And so I averaged that about 3 hours a meeting. And so you guys have put in two full weeks of work into this process and counting. And I hope these numbers are encouraging. The LOCUS process, we had 12 meetings. The first 2 meetings were 8 hours long. So let's say 16 hours for the first 2 meetings. I averaged 3 hours for the other 10. And so that's 46 hours or 6 full days of work. This does not include any subcommittee meetings or working group meetings or time that we expressed frustration to our loved ones. So add another 24 hours to that. And you just see the amount of hours we put in. So before we give this presentation, I just want to say we would not be here to reiterate, without all of your help. This is a collaborative effort. The Neighborhood Council Working Group has been working hard, and I did not calculate our hours, but let's just say umpteen.
It's coming.
Yeah. But this is all of us who have worked on this and have gotten to this point. And I'm really excited because I feel we are at a point where we might finally see some movement on this and getting a very effective civic neighborhood council that hopefully will get us to the next level, and we'll have some real power in this, and we'll be able to affect change. So I think that's without further ado. Here's the presentation. Thanks, Bill.
Good evening. I'm Bill Gage, and I want to talk about the Union Square Neighborhood Council. The Neighborhood Council it's basically been developed as an offspring of LOCUS and the CAC process, and it's a direct offspring of the Place Management Organization Subcommittee of LOCUS. It's been an ongoing and kind of a collaborative effort to adapt a model of civic engagement And this proposed Union Square Neighborhood Council reflects the Union Square neighborhood and has the ability to negotiate a community benefits agreement with future potential developers in Union Square. I believe that we have a proposal that will work. And the Union Square Neighborhood Council may not meet all the needs of everyone in this room, but it brings us all together in, and you're going to hear this term probably a lot tonight, a collaborative effort that can address our desires for the future of Union Square. The Union Square Neighborhood Council Working Group has been open to anyone that wants to participate. This includes homeowners, renters, business owners, workers, artists, students, and seniors, and of course, members of LOCUS and the CAC. We've established like a regular meeting process on alternative Wednesday evenings and Saturday mornings. And, you know, we basically had the two different times so that more people would participate at each meeting. And then, of course, we have the minutes of each of the meetings. We've established procedures to provide attendees with a safe environment in order to express their views. The Union Square Neighborhood Council Working Group has more than 62 members on its Google group, 20 to 30 members at each general meeting. 19 members are part of LOCUS, 10 members are part of the CAC. A total of 22 members of the Union Square Neighborhood Council Working Group were in either the CAC or LOCUS, or both. The Union Square Neighborhood Council established the following working groups. A structure subcommittee, which is doing this presentation, a community benefits subcommittee, and a zoning subcommittee, etc. These subcommittees report back to the overall Union Square Working Group. The structure subcommittee has developed the bylaws, a ratification, and election process for the proposed Neighborhood Council Interim Board. I ask you to join with us in the formation of this Union Square Neighborhood Council, and I'd like to introduce Jacob Kramer to discuss the process and the working group history.
Thanks, Bill. Actually, if you could go back to the previous slide. So this is just a brief overview of how we've been working. So we've been meeting about every 10 days for 2 to 3 hours, as Bill said, trying to make sure that this is as inclusive as possible, so weekends and weekdays. We have a system of co-facilitation that rotates, so at the beginning of every meeting, we find 2 new people to facilitate the next meeting and come up with an agenda, which is in a collaborative process with people who are in subcommittees or also anyone who wants to bring an agenda item. And then we have, at each meeting, we've been taking minutes, and then at the next meeting, approving those minutes, so providing sort of continuity from meeting to meeting, formalizing this impromptu process. We've also, as Bill mentioned, adopted a robust code of conduct that we affirm at every meeting. So this is sort of building goodwill and community as we do that. And then we have these subcommittees that Bill mentioned, and those have been meeting independently for many hours, and they prepare materials and then email them back to the group, and we discuss those, and sometimes we'll choose to vote on them. And we've agreed on a 2/3 majority of those present at a meeting to affirm any materials or motions that we want to move forward on. So we can go to the next one. So this is just a brief history of how we got to where we are today. And what you'll see is that this is not necessarily a straight line. It's been the outcome of a ton of discussion and debate and reworking to the level of words, to doing research on lots of different other models that other communities have done. So this started back in January when we had a first draft of bylaws and structure, and those were submitted on a Google group that anyone could comment on. And in the words of JT, he said, tear them apart. And people really took to that. And there was a lot of discussion online and in person about what we want to see. And so that was initially an appointed structure that was pulling from a lot of established organizations in Union Square. And then we sort of took part of that document, which is the values and goals that Michelle is going to talk about, and we really liked those, and we elaborated on them, and we approved those by 2/3. But the structure was something that we weren't quite sure about, and then so we formed a structure committee to investigate different kinds of structures. Do we want it appointed? Do we want it elected? Do we want it to be a hybrid of both? And all of those have pros and cons, which we debated at length. And so in February, people were interested in this notion of a hybrid structure of election and appointees. But then when the structure committee came back and presented that to the group actually, looked at it and they said, well, if we're going to have an election, why not just elect all the seats? And by 2/3 majority, people voted in favor of an elected model. And so then later in March, the structure committee presented the elected structure, which kind of mirrored some of the categories of the appointments, but making them into elected seats. And we also approved what's called a stakeholder model membership, which we're going to talk about further. Next slide. And then while this was going on, other subcommittees were busy, so we felt we needed to comment on zoning. So the zoning subcommittee came up with a really great letter that many people chose to sign on to, but it was not sent as the Neighborhood Council Working Group. It was individuals signing on to this zoning letter. Then we formalized our decision-making framework, which was affirmed by 2/3 vote. And then in April, we presented the bylaws, which we emailed out in advance of this meeting. And as we presented them, people proposed amendments, which we then formalized through the subcommittee process. And we voted on the amended bylaws just last week, and they passed within our group by 3/4 vote. So that's just to sort of give those of you who are not involved in the process a sense of just how much discussion and work went into getting to where we are today. This is the boundaries that the Union Square Neighborhood Council will be drawing its founding board from. So under our structure, you have to either live or work within those boundaries, and it's also meant to sort of deal with issues associated with that boundary. And that comes out of another city process, the name of which I'm not remembering right now.
Neighborhood plan.
The neighborhood plan.
I have, do you want me to?
Oh yeah, and Sarah has a handout, which we'd like to pass around.
But only
But
35 copies.
We have 35 copies, so you may have to share. And while that's going around, Michelle can talk about these 2 white boxes.
Yeah, that's okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. Not really sure if I need this mic because anybody who's been at another meeting knows I talk pretty loud, but it's okay. So my name is Michelle Hansen, and I'm a 5th-generation Somerville resident. I've lived in the Union Square area for 35 years. And I wanted to talk a little bit how I got involved in this process to encourage other people to become involved in the neighborhood council. So one day I was in my house and my father, Kate, said, "Hey honey, do you want to go to a meeting?" And I said, "Okay, I'll go." And 6 months and umpteen million meetings later, I stand with you here today to discuss our vision and our goals. But what kept me coming back is the idea that this could be a 30-year process. I am mother to part of our 6th generation of Somerville residents, and I would like to keep them here, and I'd like them to be able to afford to live here. So I think it's very important for us to be part of that process of the CBA. And by the way, I've been on zoning, CFO, UFO. I didn't know the difference between a UFO or a CBO or whatever, but I don't want people to be afraid of that. It's not rocket science. There's a lot of big words, but they're not scary. And zoning is not that complicated, I don't think. And we should just compromise sometimes. So going to the values and the goals, we came through a lot of meetings when we talked about our shared values. Am I doing that right? Just want to make sure. Oh, our mission, sorry. I started wrong. All right, so I'm not going to read the visions necessarily, but I will read the mission. So the mission of the Union Square Neighborhood Council is to help shape the future of Union Square as an increasingly inclusive and vibrant neighborhood and commercial center built around the aspirations of the people who live and work here. So we had certain values that guided us in this process. Among them is the idea of interdependence. We want to be inclusive. We want to think about the wellness and health of our community. It is incredibly important to me personally, and as a group, I believe, to be environmentally sound, stewardship of the earth and all that, to be transparent, to promote public discourse. And when I mean public, like I'm standing here, which is something I don't think I really ever wanted to do, but I'm willing to do it because it's that important to me personally. So we want to go to the goals in the end, what we want to have happen. We want to build community. As a member of the community for 35 years, I would say I want to build on the community because there's already a community of people who have existed here for a very long time. We want to empower the people in the community. I'm empowered, here I am. I'm a perfect example. We want to minimize displacement. I don't know what's going on behind me. Good thing I didn't look. Okay, promote affordable housing. We want to increase the economic opportunity because we are in one of the, I keep on forgetting what it's called, the zone. We are in the transformative zone, I believe what we're calling it. So we want to build and increase economic opportunity. And again, very importantly, be good stewards to the public land, to understand that environment is important. And it's something that can really happen in an urban environment. I think it is better for us, and I think that it will attract people to our area. And again, to have community representation. So thank you very much. And I think we're going to Sarah now. Did I say it? Oh, get the back. Sorry.
I might need this, actually.
Okay.
Oh, here we go. So with those goals and values, which unfortunately were whited out,
But they're on your handout.
those were part of that process I described, and we put a lot of effort into making sure that it will live up to our goals and aspirations for Union Square. But when it comes to actually coming up with the structure and the bylaws of this body, we had certain goals. So we wanted to give a framework to this founding board, which is going to be 15 elected members, that they could be agile in making so-called small decisions, ones that they're elected to deal with, but that they can, within 15 people, they can vote in their meetings to make decisions. But then when there's a sort of larger momentous decision, given that they're an interim body, when it comes to, say, passing permanent bylaws or approving a community benefits agreement, that this requires buy-in from the membership. And Sarah's going to talk about the difference between the founding board and the membership. We also want them to be able to express their opinions and positions publicly, to have the ability and a framework for ratifying permanent bylaws. We want to give them structure to negotiate with third parties, to receive and disperse funds, and to avoid potential conflicts of interest. So if you had a chance to look over the bylaws, all of those are much more exhaustively treated through various articles.
You're done. Okay.
I'm done.
Thank you, Jacob. So before I get into the membership and the leadership of this organization and the process of how they're going to get chosen, I want to just say thanks to all of my co-contributors. I think everybody was really nervous and forgot to introduce themselves. So I'm Sarah Halawa, and I am a community outreach specialist. I work at CAC, Community Action Agency of Somerville. We are right in Union Square. We have a Head Start building right on Allen Street. The back of our building is sort of the beginning of the development. And so we have Bill Gage, who was a LOCUS member. Are you a CAC member?
Yes.
So he's a CAC, not a CAC member, just LOCUS member. Tori, I think, went to all those meetings that she counted up. I think she went to all of them, and she made sure that she participated, even though she didn't have an official role on any of the bodies, right?
I applied.
And she applied. Michelle and Jacob. Michelle is a lifelong Somerville Union Square resident who got involved in this process as a result of the working group, right? So she wasn't super involved before, but through this working group, she's become very active in what's happening in Union Square. And Jacob is sort of in that group as well. Wasn't very involved, but joined through this working group process. So I just wanted to give you that context that this group is a very big group of longtime stakeholders, different interest groups, all coming together and working through our differences to try to come up with a middle ground that works, everybody can live with. That's what we've been saying. Can we live with this? It's not exactly how I want it, but can we live with it? So the way this council is an organization that will be the hope, as Michelle said, can be the voice of the community in Union Square, and this council will have members and it will have leaders, right? And so the group, our working group, decided that we want a stakeholder model for membership, meaning people who live in Union Square, people who work in Union Square, but that there are other people who have interests in Union Square. Maybe you send your kids to school right here. Maybe you go to church in Union Square. Maybe, like, there's lots of ways to be invested in Union Square beyond just living and working here. So we wanted some space for all stakeholders to be able to be members of the neighborhood council and participate in the organization, right? But the group also decided that for the board, for the leaders of the organization, they wanted it to be a little bit more limited, that your stake in Union Square was a little bit clearer. So they limited the board to people who live or work in Union Square. So those are the people who can run. So the group, as you can see in your handout, has come to agreement on a one-year interim board. So this kind of sets in motion a neighborhood council for 1 year, and the board is responsible for, among lots of things that this group will want to do and need to do, is responsible for leading the process of creating a permanent board, a permanent neighborhood council structure, a permanent neighborhood council bylaws, a permanent neighborhood council board. So that the idea is that this is interim, and any things that people felt really uncomfortable with, these can be changed, right? This is just what our working group came to agreement on in the first year, and that process is spelled out really clearly in the bylaws and includes a lot of consensus building and input from the full body, the membership. Okay, so, well, wait, this is an important one, so I don't want to skip over it. So the group came to agree that it will have 2 homeowner seats, 3 Union Square renter seats, and that these are primary residencies? I don't know. And then 3 Union Square business owners or workers seats. 3, this one is pretty open, it's any organization. So charitable, religious, educational, advocacy, any group that is a group in Union Square can run a person to represent their group on the neighborhood council, but you can only run one person. You can't run, your group can't run all 3 people for each of the seats, right? You have to choose somebody that you're running. 2 immigrant seats, and then 2 open seats, just for anybody else. And I think I have, okay, so now we're gonna, I bet people have questions or comments, and we're gonna take them, but at the end. And so the last thing that we wanted to talk about is the process, how does this start? So tonight we're doing sort of the first step in our process, which is come back to LOCUS and the CAC to sort of unveil what our working group has come up with. and hear feedback from you, your comments, answer any clarifying questions that people have. The next step is that we hope to hold a broad, well-publicized community meeting where we will present this neighborhood council to the full community, and really, like, our vision is to have a packed house of people who aren't the regular characters who are involved, but really do outreach to bring people in at that point. And this meeting will have a couple components. The first most important one is that after the presentation, the group will be asked to ratify sort of the neighborhood council concept and the bylaws. And we have, again, set a bar of 2/3 majority vote for that public meeting. Hopefully that people feel like as proud of this as I think we all are. And we'll ratify the neighborhood council at that meeting, at which point we will establish an elections committee, a group of people who care about the neighborhood council but are not planning to run for office, who will be the volunteers to run this election. That's not a municipal election, it's kind of an in-house private community election. Board candidates will be solicited, so we'll ask all the people there to consider running for the board and help them understand how to do that and announce the election. So that kind of will begin the process of officially starting the neighborhood council. Then we will have the election, and then the board, in their bylaws that we've all approved by 2/3 majority vote, will need to hold their first meeting within 2 weeks. So that's the process that we have put out for kind of like what happens next, so that people know where we're going. I think that's the end of my presentation, and I'm going to hand it back to Tori to begin the questions section.
Yes.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening. We really hope you guys like it. We're excited, so we're going to open it up to comments, questions, adulations, rotten vegetables, whatever you got. So, yep, Sarah has something else to say.
That we also, to just kind of model how we do it in the neighborhood council, like, we're not the only people that know the answer. Like, if people have clarifying questions, we'd also like to open it up to other folks who've been in the process participating to answer them as well. So it doesn't just need to be, oh, can you raise your hand if you've come to neighborhood council working group meetings and participated even a little bit? Okay, awesome, that's great. Okay, good. Well, I know there was one.
It's your turn now. Let's, yeah.
Hear on the TV. They won't be able to hear here, but unless we want to.
They can hear on the TV, but
Shu.
Oh, hi, thank you. Hi, I'm Shu, and
you can only be heard on the TV.
This is
Hello?
for the
So do you
TV,
want to come up
Oh.
and
so you can come up too.
question, or just yell? Those are your.
no, I'm soft-spoken, so. So do I need 2 mics or just one? I don't know.
You pick, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, people can
I'm
just
Shu. I'm part of the CAC, and not used to public speaking, but. So, first of all, thank you for all the work that everyone has done, and really appreciate. I've been sort of missing in absence for a little while. I have a 1-year-old. But I have a question. There is a statement here that talks about the neighborhood council's aspiration to have at least 50% women and at least 27% people of color. And I just have a question about that. So I am a mother of 2 boys, and they are mixed race. Ollie has brown hair and brown eyes, and if you look at him from a distance, you can't really tell that he's Asian until I walk into the room. And I have another son who has light hair, light skin, and he has gray eyes. So my question is, how do you measure the color of a person's skin? And is that really a valid sort of metric for choosing our neighborhood community?
Good question.
Thank you. I think the important thing to point out is these are just goals for the organization. There are no hard and fast rules, but this is a goal that we all have so that the neighborhood council reflects the community. Does that answer your question?
Does anybody else want to weigh in too, who is in
Yeah.
the discussion?
Kevin, come.
Come on, Kevin.
I'm part of the structure committee as well, but I'm horrible at public speaking. I got to directly answer your question, it's more about self-identification. If one of your sons choose to identify themselves as a person of color and as a non-person of color, then it's completely up to them. But if they do, then they would be a part of that possible 27%.
Well, I'm not asking, I'm not seeking advice as to how to tell my sons how to.
No. Yes.
I'm just asking how does a governmental body pick someone based on color?
Again, it's self-identification.
Well, No box checking. These were aspirations for our members as well as the council. It's more of like, let's have outreach. Let's find the people who aren't here. Again, it is about self-identification, but Somerville is a diverse community, and there's in census data, I think that's where you got the 27% number. So our aim is to really do the outreach and just try to get everybody on board and to be inclusive. But Shu, your question is great, and I don't know or think I've answered it, but if you want to elaborate on it further, I mean, it's a broader question, right? Like,
For example, we have 15 members, and there are 15 people who appear to be white, then that conflicts with their aspiration, and someone is going to have to make a call to say, you're not allowed to be part of this group.
okay.
Right?
Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you, Bill.
Yeah,
Come on up.
again, I think it's been said twice, it's aspirational. It doesn't mean that the group would not move on. And so it would be self-identified, and it's an aspirational thing, and it's always been discussed that way in the meetings. Even though I'm not part of the structure committee, it's always been discussed that way, that it's something we would strive for, and we would do outreach to try to make it happen. If it didn't happen, we move on.
Right, but I think what you said and what we've been saying, outreach, like this is something we all need to participate in and get people who may, be who might not normally attend here. I think it's aspirational, but I really want to work hard to make it a goal. So hopefully we can all participate in that. But in terms of legal, will we say no to people? I don't think that that's our intention. So, but I'd love to talk to you further about it, because... No, put me on the spot, that's why we're here.
We actually talked a lot about these, more actually, I'm tempted not to open this box of snakes, but we talked about it actually more in terms of the holding ourselves to having women represented in leadership on the board. And a lot of conversations came up about identifying as a female versus like who decide, like, right? And we kind of came to as a group that we trust people to say if they're a person of color, if they're a woman, and we have these goals that we are aspiring. So what we would do in that scenario where you laid it out, where we're all white, which we are here. I'm sorry to self-identify, but I've been working with you for a while. Say like maybe we're not doing good enough, and we need to be sure that the community is represented in the leadership. And the next sentence says like I think, or it's in our bylaws, that the leadership are tasked with thinking creatively about how to achieve these goals. That's their responsibility, and we'll let them think about it. It's a great question, and it's a hard one, and I'm glad you brought it up for everybody to hold. Jeff, did you want to?
Yeah, I just want.
Just for the TV, I'm sorry. So you can yell into it, or you can.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm biracial and I consider myself a person of color. And with so many institutions these days, predominantly, made up of white people or entirely made up of men, I find it to be a powerful statement of aspiration that we should all work to make sure that this body is reflective of the demographics of the community. So just to speak up in favor of it.
There's another question.
I think to clarify the issue, you've got these 15 proposal of structure of 15 seats for the interim board, and those criteria are pretty objective, pretty cut and dry. So maybe if you could clarify the difference in authority and responsibilities between your members and the people who would serve on the board. That would help understand the race issue and all the other representational issues that you're talking about.
So, oh, thanks.
I'll just sort of hang.
Okay, yeah. So the members are a much broader organization or group of people, and it's very open, and their responsibilities are limited to electing the board and also ratifying really important things. But that doesn't mean they don't have a role in the neighborhood council as a whole, because this arose out of the process of our working group meetings, where everyone is welcome to attend and everyone has a voice. And we imagine the meetings of this group to work somewhat like this session, where there's probably a presentation and then there's questions and participation from the members. So that's sort of and then the distinction is that on matters that are not very large matters, the board is empowered to vote with by just majority to make decisions. Does that answer your question? Is there?
Yeah, you can come up there.
Do you want to clarify?
Yeah, let's imagine that there is an issue with, say, traffic in Union Square, and there's a bike lane, but nobody's using it. So we want to repaint, the people say, let's repaint the bike lane. And so the neighborhood council comes up with a proposal. Are we going to, write a letter to the city to say, we've got to repaint this bike lane immediately? That's sort of a decision where, a group of 15 people who've been elected by a membership can get together and vote up or down, yes, we're gonna write at a public meeting, and we're gonna do that. And then versus the sort of thing where we wanna have permanent bylaws that has to be ratified by membership by the 2/3, or a community benefits agreement, which is something that was always in the background of this formational process. There's a lot of people who see this as a very important component to ongoing development in Union Square, is to have a body that comes from the neighborhood to negotiate directly with developers. So what we want out of that process is to have this elected body, be empowered to create a committee to do the negotiation, but for the outcome of that negotiation to be ratified by the wider membership. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it sounds like there's a little bit of vagueness still to be worked out in terms of the delineation of authorities and who would vote on what, but that's one of the things that's going to be worked out in this next year.
Yeah, so we were able to come up with, for instance, those large decisions that I mentioned, we were able to come up with 2 examples of that. I think that, that founding board, when they start engaging with their duties, may come up with more things that they feel the wider membership needs to be polled on. And the membership, of course, can also propose things that, there's a mechanism in the bylaws for the membership to propose things to the board for investigation or for voting.
That's for TV.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate all the work and goodwill that's gone into this. I have a question that goes back to structure and the composition of the board. What's unusual about the election of a board here is that it's not based on geography. It's based on categorization. And the interim bylaws lay out a categorization of the seats, and that's a dangerous proposition. It's difficult enough when you do it by geography that you don't discriminate on geography. It's called gerrymandering. This is a form of potentially discriminating by category. One of the things is not just based on the individual composition, but it's based on group composition. It says religious group or organization would be able to run people for seats. I believe the country has a great tradition in religious freedom, but is careful not to bring that into the public realm in the sense that government have some component that's religious. Whereas here, it's stated that there would be a religious component. It's also charitable. What variety does charity come in? Education, what kind of education? What kind of advocacy? For what? That groups would be able to run. So it seems to be a dangerous proposition, not only with the individuals, but also with the groups, to have some small group making the decisions. Thank you.
Do we have people who want to speak to that?
So which one should I talk into?
Oh, there's.
Oh, okay.
What do you want next?
Sorry. So thanks, I just wanted to speak to that, and I think it came up in one of the earlier comments too, but I think I've been working with some of these folks and a lot of others in this room, and I think it's important to clarify that we're not with this trying to replace the Board of Aldermen or any of the other government functions that the City of Somerville has. We really appreciate the work that the city staff and the Board of Aldermen put in. And I know when LOCUS was here, they talked a lot about like a missing level of government, and we're not trying to replace the city government. We're sort of trying to create a community entity and to do something that could be incorporated as a nonprofit, could act independently from the city, but could also collaborate with the city as we've been doing in certain ways. So I think it's important to clarify that we're not trying to replace the city government. The city government does a lot of good stuff. We're actually trying to create something new that can supplement that and give voice to people who don't always have a voice through the city processes.
Which one actually makes
This
noise?
amplifies, this one's TV, so
Okay.
we need both.
I just wanted to speak to Steve's point. I think that the fact that that category has multiple categories in it is an effort to sort of recognize that there are institutions within the community which have a role and an investment in the community. Some of them are the churches, some of them are other religious institutions, and some of them have other forms. It's the most kind of broad category, and I think it's an effort to include them rather than to require that they play a particular role. Father Curran, for instance, was a valued member of the CAC and brought the concerns of a community that's invested in the community in a different way.
I discussed it with Father Curran. Two Catholic churches, there are other religions that have no interest.
Well, they would also be allowed to, be part of that.
Do you want to be heard? Can you speak loudly? I can bring the mic to you.
Yes, I do. I suppose if I speak loudly into the TV one, then it's really loud on the TV. So I'm Stephanie Hirsch. I was a member of LOCUS, and I've also been to many of the planning meetings, not all of them though. And the main concern that I have, which I expressed at the meeting, which I think is just a refinement, I hope, to this, is a worry that to figure out which seat you would run for seems like it might require or end up happening that there's a slate of candidates or multiple slates of candidates. And maybe that's okay. I'm not being an election designer expert. I don't really know, but I am worried that somebody who doesn't belong to a slate or one of the slates wouldn't have a chance to be wouldn't have a chance to win. And I think that would be a shame, because there may be groups that are just really passionate about one particular topic, like the bike community, or I know people are really interested in having athletic fields, and they might not really be kind of part of the larger fabric, or they may not be going to all the regular meetings, but they may have an issue that they really, really care about. And they don't need to have multiple seats on the board, but if you had this more isolated group have one seat on the board, they would be able to chime in, and then people would be able to see how their issue connects to other issues. So if there is a way to address that through some kind of refinement to the model, I think that would be great. One that I had proposed, which is a bigger change, is having more open seats, so that people would be kind of canvassing around a particular issue and building up support and helping to define a particular platform topic, whether it be athletic fields or housing or the zoning or the schools. And another smaller modification is, I think, called cumulative voting, which says that you can put all of your votes on one candidate if you want, so that if you did have an isolated group like a bike committee, they could put all their votes on a particular candidate and more likely to get one seat. Or maybe there's other options, but that is my concern. How do you make sure that some people aren't totally locked out of it if they're not already in the mix? But if you do stick with this model, I do think it would be great to add a category for either seniors or longtime residents, and also for families. And then I have heard, as I've been talking to people, a wish for an additional owner and also a business owner. Those are less my issues, but ones that I have heard from the neighborhood.
It's not a response. It's really actually going back to some of the things that people are saying. I would have to agree with the gentleman talking about religion. I'm a member of the LOCUS group. I'm also a Union Square resident. I'm Cuban and I'm Jewish. But if you take the parameter of the limits of the boundary, my temple is not in that. So it would be interesting to understand which religious groups are within those boundaries. And if we're getting into the idea of choosing religions, what religions are within those boundaries? And I think that just goes into another realm. I mean, it becomes broad because it's so many in so many different areas. And I would also like to say that the idea of just putting immigrant in 2 seats, I find that kind of offensive because it seems like it's like a throw. Like, you have to be a little bit more definitive as to what that is. What defines an immigrant? Many things define an immigrant. I'm an immigrant, so I think that 2 seats that you're saying about an immigrant, you need to define that a little bit more as to really what does it entail and who can apply for that. And sadly, when you see this room, you can see that this room is 90% white, and is it our flaw that we're not reaching out to these people? But I think that you should really look into this and observe that the people that you're trying to serve can't get babysitters to come to these meetings, are working right now somewhere. So we need to be conscious of those things too, because if we want to include them, we need to be conscious of their lives and what their schedules are. So I think that the immigrant part needs to be really relooked at.
Because now I feel like it is murky enough around this religious organization question. So you have religious organizations that are located in Union Square. To be on the board, and then you have religious, so I'm Muslim, and the mosque nearest mosque is in Cambridge. And in order to run for the board, you have to live or work in Union Square. So if my religious organization wanted to have a seat on the Union Square Neighborhood Council, they would need to run a candidate that they chose who lived or worked in Union Square, right? So it is meant, that group, as I forget your name, Anne, mentioned it. So there's like a couple tensions, right? There's a real tension of having a body that is representative of a community and trying to do that, and like just as you were saying, immigrant, like what does it mean to be an immigrant? Is it just that you were born in another place, or is there something else that we're talking about, trying to have a voice on this body? And so this was sort of like, we held that tension of, we could have just done all open seats and that would have helped with the tension that Stephanie was talking about, of what if I'm somebody who's not a part of, who doesn't know a lot of other people, and how do I get elected? But I think the consensus was that that the group felt like we wanted to balance between having some of the different interests that we could define and not get into defining what race somebody is and what qualifies as a person of color for this in order to run on this board, but identify some categories that do represent the full different different groups of people in Union Square, and then hopefully in like advocacy group, like we care about all the advocacy groups, and if you run and you talk about your issue and people vote for you and you win and you're on the neighborhood council, then clearly that issue that you were talking about resonated with the stakeholders in Union Square, right? So we kind of were like, this isn't perfect. This is trying to handle some of these tensions. It's for 1 year, and it's getting at some of our aspirational goals. It's moving us in the direction, but it definitely needs to be reworked and taken into account. So thanks for all of these comments. They're really helpful to think about that. Okay, I might just stop talking.
So I guess I wanted to address two things. One is that there is no perfect, sorry about that. There is no perfect mix of constituencies and demographics that okay. Our goal is to get started and to make sure that that is reasonably representative, but as Jacob described, we had all different kinds of configurations, and we could have gone on for months and months more because no mix is going to be perfect. We didn't want to let perfect be the enemy of getting started, because we can't, if we don't exist, and I shouldn't say we because I don't live or work in Union Square, so I am not going to be part of the board, but we don't want to we don't want to prevent ourselves from being able to exist and have the resources to do more outreach, to have an official existence so that we can work with the developer. So that's the first thing. The second thing goes back to the discussion about the role of the membership versus the role of the board. The board is an official decision-making body, but the membership is going to be weighing in. The whole idea is to have an engaged membership that is empowered regardless of whether you're on the board or not. And so if a particular person is not part of a larger group that has enough and gets enough votes to be elected to the board, they still have a voice, and they can still raise issues. They can still come with friends and colleagues and people who believe in the principles that they're espousing or the causes that they want to see addressed, and they can raise them at a meeting. And the whole idea of not of including both an active membership and a board is that there isn't such a centralized control of power that individual residents or people who work in Union Square can't really weigh in and influence the outcomes.
Which one's the talking? Oh. I got it. Okay. To answer the question of people who might need babysitters or translators or other additional help in participating in the neighborhood council. I believe we have support from the city on the spot, Sue, you're on the spot. I believe we have support from the city in the neighborhood council process to have accommodations for those who might need sitters or translators. Is that part of, have we discussed that?
To be fully honest, I'm not sure about the sitter part, but the translator part, yes. To a certain extent, I don't know how it would work out with the neighborhood council, but of course, in the formation of it, if anyone needs translators, just as today, we would provide it.
Okay, so maybe the babysitter question is something we can continue to work on because that's important.
I'm going to walk over to the other side. It seems like I'm bound up here. We got loud talkers over here?
I'm not talking.
I know this is a loud talker.
Oh, yeah. You know it's bad when the city immediately looks at you and says, oh, you're a loud talker. We all know about you. I don't know if people still had questions regarding the seats. If people still have questions, I'll yield to those people. You have a question about the seats, so I'll save my question.
So I'm concerned, clearly, since I represent local businesses, about having owners and workers in the same category. I think that they often have, while they have overlapping issues, they also often have separate ones. And so I think actually both for the business owners and the workers, I think it should be separated and delineated. I also, while I'm up here, I just want to make a pitch that if we're going to have a general meeting, that there be at least 2 weeks prior to that the materials be disseminated and the date disseminated. And then finally, because I finally, having had the first Saturday, the farmer's market, I had a chance to read the bylaws, and I was confused what was interim and what was now. So you might just want to look back at that and kind of put that in. So those are my 3 points.
So I think, can you offer some clarification on that? Because, well, especially the bylaws question. So I think there is one set of bylaws now that goes to this one, is proposed to go to the one-year organization.
Sure. So these are interim bylaws for the first year. And it's the interim council is tasked with coming up with permanent bylaws and putting them through the ratification process that's described in these interim bylaws. And if, for some reason, they are unable to do that, there is a clause in these bylaws whereby we can re-adopt the interim bylaws through the same process through which they were originally ratified and continue the existence of the neighborhood council. Is that
For
correct?
1 more year.
For 1 more year.
They have to get it right.
Yeah.
So like it kind of, like either, yeah.
So it does not completely evaporate 365 days after ratification, but it is a primary task of the interim council to come up with permanent bylaws. Does that answer your question?
You're just saying there's some like just
I'm
make
just
read
saying,
through it again.
when I was reading through, I was like, is this permanent or interim? So I just think you need to drop some interims in there.
And some interims. Okay.
Special relationship with the cameraman. I got his microphone. I live on Lake Street. Hi, Allison Frieden. But I didn't plan to speak, but when it came to religious and groups and things like that, people are very passionate about their religion, whether they have it or don't attend any type of mass or ceremony. And I was thinking that whenever you had alluded to my nearest mosque is in Cambridge, and if they want to elect official that lives in Union Square, then they can do that. But I think we should only have it to be, I mean, not to disclude your religion, but I think we should not include religion at all because it's going to get people very, very passionate, and the groups that are nominating a representative should be just groups that exist in Union Square, so that it's a Union Square group specifically and not just you know, my religion's outside in Boston or Cambridge or Arlington, and they want to nominate me because I live in here, then you would have an outside group represented in Union Square. And then that particular group would have a vested interest in what happens in Union Square, and they don't exist in the area. So that's my comment.
So I hope this is on topic, but what troubles me about this more than anything is the incredibly broad and actually sort of vague definition of stakeholder. And although the regular membership does have a more limited role than the board, it's actually crucial because they are the ones who will choose the founding board. And so I guess as someone who's lived in Union Square for a long time, I've often felt that whether it's citywide organizations or the city itself, sometimes we have a burden which is imposed on us. And I think the neighborhood council and the benefits which it would administer are a special opportunity to get some of that back to help determine our own future and the things we want. I don't think someone who is a client of an agency here, you know, whether that means, and I don't know what agency means in this case, is it, you know, the Allstate Insurance Agency, is it CAS or SCC, someone who just basically says they're a stakeholder. It bothers me that these folks should be determining our future. The city as a whole will be getting tax benefits from the development that's going to be happening in Union Square, but we're going to be suffering some of the adverse effects of that. Not to say that there won't be benefits as well. So I guess I'd like to understand the rationale for allowing people who have possibly very limited connections to Union Square, and not to say they're not stakeholders at all, but they're much more limited stakeholders than people who live or work in Union Square. What was the basis for the decision to make this so broad?
Great question. We had a lot of conversations about it. Katie seemed like she wanted to.
Trying to think about the best way to frame this. So I don't want to speak on behalf of the structure group because I haven't been part of those conversations, but I would turn that back around and make a broader point that what's being discussed here in terms of the neighborhood council doesn't exist in isolation. And right now, it's being visioned as part of a much larger community benefits strategy that's citywide. And one of the really operative questions within that strategy is, of the resources, and specifically financial resources that are available, what portion of those are going to go to Union Square specifically, and what portion of those are going to be available? So I think that is a really critical question. I think it ties into this wider kind of set of issues around the community benefits ordinance, which hopefully we'll also talk about a little bit. But I think in terms of the vision for what a stakeholder is, I think Steve Mackey has kind of spoken to this most passionately, that a stakeholder should be anyone who shows up and feels they have a connection to Union Square. And in the visioning that's been put forth here, there's been a very clear effort to try to balance that broad investment that so many of us feel in this area with direct accountability to the people who live and work in the square. That's the vision behind this board membership structure. So I think it's a complicated question. I think there's been a lot of intentionality behind trying to address it. And I think in a vision where the Union Square Neighborhood Council is working as it should, that mission is driven by people who live and work in the square.
Can I just follow up on that? My concern is when you talk about it being driven by the people, excuse me, when you talk about it being driven by the people who live in the square, the way it's fundamentally driven is by voting. One of my concerns is that it would be very possible to basically sort of co-opt this whole process if you can draw on a much larger citywide or even region-wide group and have them show up perhaps to this meeting in which these are ratified or to the election, and basically anyone who comes can basically self-identify as a stakeholder, then you can, a group that's able to mobilize enough people, not necessarily from Union Square, but from, their larger service area, could definitely take over the whole process. Now that we know there are groups with professional organizers in Somerville that are able to get 100 or 150 people out, from time to time for issues they care about. There's nothing wrong with that, but my concern is that it may be opposed to the balance that we'd be looking for. If you have someone with a narrow agenda and really one or two issues that they consider most important, the issue that Stephanie talked about of having a slate, I think, is a very serious one, because a group that's organized and has the ability to get a lot of people to show up for these rare but very important meetings in which the larger membership can vote could definitely take over the process and have their slate elected to the exclusion of anyone else. How do you prevent that if you can allow people who are drawn from a very large area, from the city as a whole, or perhaps even outside the city?
I'd like to say that I never agree with Jim on anything, but I'm agreeing with him completely.
So let me just say that we have had, sorry, is your name Jim, sir? All right, how are you? I'm Michelle. Okay. We have had hours and hours and hours in meetings, and we have talked about this ad infinitum. I am telling you, we've talked about astroturfing. We've had all of these discussions. And for myself personally, we had to stop being a bunch of people in a room talking to each other about becoming an entity, and we had to move forward. Because this is a process that is moving forward without us if we don't. So it is most important to me as a person who lives in Union Square, whose family's been here for over 100 years, that we do not get lost in this process. And if we sit around and we consistently, well, I can't trust this one, and this one's not who they say they are. We have to have some trust, at least for this first year, to get this off the ground, give it to the board. And in this process also, by the way, when we have meetings, a person from the general group will be with a person who is on the board, co-facilitating the meetings. So it will always be somebody from the group helping to make the agenda for the meetings. But the reason why, at one point, because there was a point at which I was just going to say, forget it, I don't want to come to these meetings anymore, I can be honest with you. We had to move forward. We cannot be a bunch of people looking at each other, talking about words. We have to move forward with this process, or we're going to be lost. And I feel that my children's future and the future of the people whose children are here and not here is going to be wasted, and it's going to be taken over by a corporation that I don't want that to happen. So.
Thank you. I would also just like to add that this group of people here, we want everyone here to be involved in the membership solicitation process and in the elections process. And hopefully some of you will also choose to run for seats on the board. So we do imagine this and spreading out from here and canvassing and trying to bring more and more people in as the way that wider membership gets large enough so it can't be co-opted by the groups that Jim is worried about. So I think that is the vision that we have, is a sort of a positive view of that stakeholder membership as opposed to the sort of darker flip side, which some people might be concerned about.
That's actually, the election process is the concern that I have. I see the way that this election process is set up, at least on paper. It could be different, somebody can clarify it better for me. But it just seems that it's going to be a competition of which group for which agenda item gets the most people inside of a room. And when you have organizations that have people whose job is to call other people all day long, and for those of us that just don't have that luxury, we seem like we're outnumbered. On the flip side, I also don't want 50 people who have just been picked up at an MBTA station by a random organization marching them in just to vote for their particular candidate. So if we could get some sort of clarification on the election process, or get a better election process that kind of lays out a better playing field, I think I would feel better about it.
I guess I would just like to second some of the things that have been said here, and I am a resident, and just despite, I guess, how you're kind of framing the process, the fact is when you look at this slide, only 2 of these seats go to folks who are residents here. And I agree, much of the other population is going to be more transient, you know. There's just, it's as simple as there's 2. seats. Homeowners, sorry, yes. They're vastly outnumbered by, as other people have mentioned, by organizations. It just looks to me, there's not even kind of an equal number as some of the other groups. So I think it's going to be very easy for the folks that live here to end up without a voice.
That's what we're doing. Okay.
That's an extra TV mic, and that's the amplification.
Okay, go ahead. I'll hold this, you do.
Okay. I mean, it's not a debate, but you could say that about any of the categories, but it just looks to me like some of the categories have been given more weight in terms of seats than others, so.
So you were saying that there's no residents here, or there's only two? Two homeowners. All of these categories, you have to live in Union Square or work in Union Square.
I hear that, but then why not, then why are the homeowners given a lower number than other categories?
I believe because the majority of people in Somerville are renters and not homeowners. I think that was the feeling there.
I also think that people, like I know myself, I think I fit into 5 of those categories. So the idea that you can't be an immigrant who works in Union Square and you own a home, and you go to St. Joseph's, I mean, any of those things, I fit into that, all of those categories. So I'm just saying, I know I gave away my Somerville-ness there, just saying.
It's not that so much as,
Yeah.
I think it goes to, again, the voting and the decision-making, and who in the organization, is going to have a voice, versus, some of these, are, everybody falls into
You're talking about
numerous
the board
categories.
versus the membership? And are you
I guess I'm
asking-
more talking about how voting would work, or how decisions would be made in terms of governance.
Okay, so I think what we said was that there will be a 2/3 vote on any of the major decisions that would need to be made by the board. So that would mean passing of permanent bylaws, anything that had to do with the CBA, anything other than what, like Jacob said, like if you want to repaint the bike lanes or something in the middle of Union Square, which I think, board could probably say, yeah, we think it's a good idea, or we'll write to the mayor about that or something like that. But anything that really is fundamentally going to change Union Square or have a permanent, permanent mark on the Union Square area, I think it has to be brought to the full group and passed by 2/3. Am I right about that?
Yes.
So that's my feeling on that. Who's next?
Where do you want me to go?
Right here.
Hey everyone, my name is Alex Frieden. I live on Lake Street as well. First of all, I want to congratulate you guys. You did an amazing job. This is like a ton of work, and apparently you put in like 3 years worth of subcommittee meetings, or however deep it goes here. I'm a homeowner, and I actually kind of like that the homeowners have less of a representation than renters. I think probably both should be upped in general, just because it seems the sum of the people who live here is less than business and the kind of nonprofit category you have. I don't know. It's kind of, I'm not sure. I also want to talk. So for many of us, the area you capture here is enormous for Union Square. This represents kind of like, one could argue this is 5 different neighborhoods here, which is totally legitimate. But I do want to state that the concerns of a lot of the neighborhood of Inman Square and the concerns of places near kind of going towards the Wynn Casino, this kind of people are gonna the kind of traffic changes that come here are we're really gonna get hit hard really fast about this. We're already seeing people in the Springfield, off of Springfield Street are already seeing this pretty bad. So to that effect, I'd really like to see that the neighborhood council take on a Vision Zero initiative here and really focus on keeping streets safe, keeping cars going slow, and making sure that these places are for people. And I know it's captured here in some form of wellness and some other categories, but I'd really like to see this definitively stated.
So thank you for that, and thank you, that shows me that you are going to support the neighborhood council. 'cause-
And run for the
and
board
run for
maybe,
the
and
board
run.
maybe. And also because, again, I keep on saying, I say it every meeting, people who are at these meetings are sick of me saying this. I don't want to be a person talking in a room and not an entity. We need to become a neighborhood council that we can have the effect and be able to speak to the issues that you're very eloquently spoke to right now. So that's our hope, and that's why we're here.
Great. Yeah, that's all I had. Thank you.
Yes, Kevin Dickinson. I wanted to speak to the issue of the religious, charitable, and educational advocacy groups. I'm all in favor of having a faith-based organization on the neighborhood council. Those faith-based organizations are part of the root and backbone of any community, and to exclude them from the neighborhood council would be just wrong. And on the other side of that, I'm sorry, but if your mosque, church, synagogue, temple, or whatever is outside those boundaries, no, you don't get a part to be on the council. I'm a United Methodist. I go to Epworth Harvard in Harvard Square. But no, they don't get a vote on that council. And I don't get to represent their interests on that council. It's just for people and organizations in the boundaries of Union Square.
I think this moment really clearly illustrates how this process has been going. It is really, really hard to find, to Jim's point, and Steve Mackey was really, really clearly the other end of that pole. Everybody should be able to participate who lives in Somerville at every level of this organization, and held that position really strongly. And so this entire process was about finding the center that everybody could live with. And it's really, really tricky. And I think hopefully this discussion here is demonstrating all of the different flavors or things that people cared really passionately about and wanted to see happen. And we are hopeful that through this process that this is, again, it's a middle ground for a year.
I'm sorry if I missed this, but I don't quite understand who votes. Like, who actually votes? Just whoever shows up that night? Is there some barrier to, do you have to prove that you're within these boundaries in order to vote? I mean, how does that work exactly?
That's a great question. So for the candidates, they have to show their eligibility, right? So they have to show that they live or work in Union Square, and the elections committee that gets established will that's who they show it to, right? For members, we have it was a tricky conversation because it's like, well, we're not a thing yet, so how can we have members, right? It's like chicken and egg. But what we kind of came to is that we'll have a membership form, and on the membership form, you put your name, your address, and then you indicate whether you live, work, or are a stakeholder in Union Square. And if you check stakeholder, then you have to write what your stake in Union Square is. So I go to Ruby Rogers, right? I am a parent of a Head Start child at the Head Start on Allen Street, right? So those are the kinds of things. Or we have a parishioner at Father Richard's church, right? So those are at St. Joseph. So those are the kinds of things, and we kind of highlight some examples of that. Yeah. So and then the voting happens. Good question. The voting happens on a Wednesday evening for chunks where people can just show up and drop ballots in a box, and then on a Saturday from noon until 3. And then from 3 to 5, there'll be a meeting where people can have discussions and also drop ballots in a box. And the hope is to count those ballots by the end of the meeting and actually be able to announce the results of the election.
Can I ask a quick follow-up? I'm sorry. So you're saying, we as homeowners, renters, what have you, can run for one of these seats, but you're also saying, canvass and all, I mean, is that what you're expecting us to do, to go door to door and talk to people, or is there going to be some event where people, introduce themselves and say why they want to be on this board? I mean, I guess I'm not quite sure about how this process works, about how, people have been coming to these meetings, get to know the people who would like to be, on this council.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if you're quick.
I mean, who want to be on the board. I'm saying.
How people learn about the neighborhood council and understand that they can run for office and then learn how to run for office.
People who want to be on the board,
So,
how do they campaign for their positions?
Is that just on them, on us? Or are there going to be events where people?
So you're going to, all right, go.
Yeah,
Going to him.
get known.
Yeah, so we were hoping that we would have a candidates night as one opportunity for people to come meet the candidates. The elections committee would also make a pamphlet about all the candidates and their candidate statements. But then also I think candidates, it would also be on them, like it is on our friends here running for aldermen, that they have to, you have to if you want people to vote for you, you have to let people know about you and go to different events. But yeah, we were hoping to structure some of it so that it's accessible and easy.
I asked because I've lived around this neighborhood for more than 20 years, and I can guarantee you many of my neighbors, who are really involved in the community, as I know it, have no idea this is going on, have no idea this group is being formed, and have no idea of the possible, serious influence this organization may have. And a lot of these people aren't going to be part of this process, and how do we, I don't know, how do we bring them in, or,
I think it's such a good point, and I think we are,
I think we came up with some things that could help that.
Okay.
So do you want me to say it?
Michelle wants to
Okay,
say
so
something.
we did consider that so we were thinking about doing a verse 911 call, or I think that's what they call it, where it goes to the people in Union Square that's demarcated by these boundaries, especially, where they make an announcement of the publicized meeting and that there will be, we have a candidates forum and when we actually have the election. And the other thing is say, for instance, if I were going to run, which I don't know that I am now, but if I were, I would go to everybody in my neighborhood, as people should, knock on their doors and say, hey, Linda, hey, Paula, come on down. You know what I mean? Because that's part of the process. It's democracy, how it works. You pound the pavement, you knock on doors, and people vote for you. Hopefully. Yeah, go ahead.
It's very easy somebody shows up at your house and says, I'm running for alderman. But when you show up, to his point, and somebody says, hey, I'm running for the election, they're like, what is that? I've never heard of it. So now you're going through a process of educating people who don't know what that is. So I think that it's up to you, what we're saying. You need to set up the protocols that allow for this to take place, a website, announcements, so to filter the city and the constituents of Union Square for them to know that this is going to happen, not throw it so much on the people who have to run and go, hey, you got to go knock on doors, man.
No, you have to do both. I think I made that clear. I think what I was saying is that you have to do the reverse. You have to publicize it in the newspaper. You have to do all of those things. All of the above. All of the above.
Exactly, but the same group of people that we see here, the same group of people that know about this.
But I think Joe had his up longer, to be honest with you.
The final point I'll make is this is the beginning of the process, not this is the point, I think, where we can tell people we have some agreement around there's a community meeting where you can learn and you get to vote on moving forward, right? It's not like this already existed and we're saying, oh, you didn't know about it? Sorry for, you should have come to the meeting. No, this is the beginning of a process of spreading the word, and the city has agreed to help us use their mechanisms that are already in place to do that. So great points, both of you, and that's a real challenge of this being an effective community group.
So can I just say a process point? I'm very hopeful that the feedback that people are providing will get reflected in what goes to the bigger presentation, and I wonder, can we have either in a follow-up survey that goes out to the CAC and LOCUS, a way to prioritize what people have said so that there can be some adjustments between now and the neighborhood meeting. Because I think it's really important that there be a process of refinement in the same way that the cities, I've been in on the city a million times, they come up with this great plan, they send it out, people hate it. They get conflicting feedback from all kinds of different groups, and then they figure out a way to refine it, and that can happen a whole bunch of times. And this does have to be an iterative process, and this is sort of the first roadshow with it. So I really hope, and I recommend that we walk away here knowing what the plan will be for how the feedback gets integrated. Maybe you can present multiple options at the larger meeting, but in some way, this feedback, I hope it's reflected.
I think that's a wonderful point, Stephanie. Yes, thank you. When is our next meeting?
Next Saturday.
Next Saturday is our meeting from...
Is it this Saturday?
This Saturday?
Facilitator, when's our next meeting? When's our next meeting?
The next meeting of the Neighborhood Council Working Group
Yeah, is?
is...
Next Saturday. The 20th. The 20th.
It's...
That's not the big public. No.
No, but I'm saying all of you are invited to that meeting because I think this conversation is going to continue there. And I love your point, Stephanie, and perhaps we can talk more after. And I, again, just want to emphasize, like, the city is in partnership with us, so yes, can we have a neighborhood council website where the people who are running can have a little bio, that the whole process can be explained and we start getting, again, using the city's resources to help with that.
Yeah, hold on. Cool. I want to take a minute, and I want to respond to 2 points separately, because the same kind of questions keep coming up in a bunch of different frameworks. And I just want to say this kind of for the room. I don't know anybody that I have met in this process that is genuinely afraid of an election. And when the city discusses this, when the Board of Aldermen discusses the neighborhood council, and when the city's reps get up to discuss the neighborhood council, which is a really essential part of the vision that the city is putting forward here, the thing that is essential to them is that this process is open, inclusive, and democratic. If it wasn't, it wouldn't pass muster with those processes. And I think one of the reasons that the structure committee, one of the really motivating points for the structure committee in particular to try to get these bylaws in a presentable shape, to try to get this framework in a presentable shape for you, is that this group firmly believes that, the group that has been working on the neighborhood council firmly believes that it is a mandate of that group that we are doing that outreach. We wouldn't be putting this much work into the process if that outreach and that representation wasn't critical. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say reflects to a lot of the concerns. Sorry. Okay, the second thing I want to say reflects the concerns that people have in the room about this being written in stone. And one thing that is critical to remember here is that if you don't like what the bylaws look like right now, you can come to a neighborhood council working group meeting and propose an amendment. We've had 2 amendments been proposed already. There is no limit to the amendments that can be proposed. This is an interim set of bylaws that are going to go before this larger group to be ratified. But if you don't like them between now and then, you can come to these meetings and you can propose an amendment. That's a really critical part of the process. Not everything passes. There's a lot of stuff that I wanted in these bylaws. There's a lot of stuff that I wanted out of this process that didn't pass. But one of the things that has been very gratifying about the working group meetings so far is that participation matters and that participation is really credited. These meetings are incredibly contentious. We disagree a lot. But one of the things that's really powerful about them is you have a lot of people in the room who are making the strongest cases that they can make to each other about things that they are passionate about. And I can't count the number of times that my own personal position has been changed based on hearing the positions of other people in the room. They are open meetings. This is an extension of the CAC LOCUS process. Anyone is welcome to participate at any point. And if those are concerns that you have, the most effective way that you can make those changes is to help us shape this group at whatever stage it exists and make it better.
A question I was asked earlier that nobody has answered yet is who gets to vote? Do you have to live in Union Square as defined by you guys? Do you live in Somerville? Do you live in Massachusetts? Do you just have to be alive? Can anybody vote?
You either have to, you have to live in Union Square, in the district, as the map shows, or you have to work in Union Square.
This is for voting.
To be a member.
To be a member.
Member?
To be a member. Yeah,
Oh,
to be a
okay.
voter.
Well, no,
Hold on.
wait a minute,
Wait a
I'm
minute,
sorry.
he's a little, go ahead.
I was
So
talking about.
you're asking about to be a
Talking
voting
about the
member who votes for the elected board?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the stakeholder model of membership that came out of this process that we described. And as Sarah described, there will be a membership form that people can fill out. You're either, you live here, you work here, or you consider yourself a stakeholder. And you define that stakeholder relationship to Union Square. And I think to get to the point that some people seem concerned about of outside groups having too much influence, I would say we will know who is a stakeholder member, and if that seems like it's spiraling out of control, then clearly this aspect of the process has a problem. But we do see it as the mechanism for getting a lot of voices who rely on Union Square and who have a stake in Union Square to have a voice in how things proceed.
Sorry, wait. Yeah, follow up.
It's an interim board, yeah.
No, he said if it gets on.
We're going to call the group, or is it?
I think that you've done an incredible amount of thoughtful work about how to constitute this board, and it's very difficult, and I appreciate that it's interim and all those kinds of things. And I think that your request that people articulate what their stake is, for instance, I go to the farmer's market every week, whatever, but I think that it's in the board, and I understand the desire that this, and I have obviously supported the idea that owners and renters and people who work in Union Square have a particular investment and commitment to what happens in the square. But Union Square, as envisioned moving forward as kind of the downtown of Somerville and the center of Somerville in a new way, means that we all have a stake in it. And it matters to all of us, and some of us have spent years working on it, as you know, who don't live in the center or work in the center. So I would request that you consider that the open seats be maybe even a little more open, and that there be some voice of people who are not explicitly residents or workers in Union Square, that the rest of us have a representative in the committee as well. And one of the reasons I would do that is that if you don't, then you're going to set up an oppositional system with the city, and the city will be the only representative for those of us who are not residents within the specific boundary. And it would be better if the council had its own voices and its own ability to represent people in the rest of the neighborhoods around Union Square, and that not become an oppositional structure.
Yep, you can go.
I'm a business owner here in Union Square. I have been here 5 years, and have been hard for me just to go to any of these meetings, and so it's really hard for business to be part sometimes, because we have to run a business, run a family, and live here in the city. And I'm concerned about this election and the way of these stakeholders and stuff. So anyone that goes to my restaurant can vote. And I think that that's not the way to do it. The people that live and work here should be the only one that can decide how to do it. We cannot send people from Cambridge and other people that come here from my restaurant, from Newton, Wellesley, come here to dictate what's going to happen in Union Square. I think that's a mistake.
Is the stakeholder definition that loose? It is? Like, it's pretty loose. Really? If they're right.
Yeah, hi, so I'm Wig, I think most people know me. I live on Highland Avenue on the wrong side, so I'm outside the district. I'm closer than Fred and a couple other people who put in a lot of work. And the first thing I want to say is that if you've been to these meetings, everybody's treated equal. You know, if you're willing to put your time in and you're there out of interest in the topic, everybody gets to speak and participate, and that's been terrific. So you kind of owe your participation. The second thing is that I think by having board members restricted, that certainly prevents a takeover of the board. I do think in an extreme it is possible because of the leakiness of the definition of people with an interest or stake in Union Square, that could be an issue in the extreme. Similar things came up with the CAC task force. Some unions just wanted to build parking lots and a few big box stores instead of more, and kind of invaded meetings, and we had a residency requirement for Mystic View, Somerville residency. So I think those are great issues to bring up. I think they can be dealt with in a practical matter. I actually like a little bit of leakiness. I like if somebody works across Somerville or really is interested in Union Square and spends a lot of time here, that there might be some membership. But you could say that 80% of voters have to kind of be in the district that you want them to find. There's ways to address that. So I just wanted to bring up those issues. And honestly, at the end of the day, all of these volunteer groups are not about who decides what the rules are up front. They're about who participates day in and day out, month in and month out. You cannot control these groups by controlling the bylaws. You really have to participate. And the bylaws can be changed. That's why it's set up to be just a one-year interim set of bylaws and 1 year membership and those slots and everything. And in the extreme, if the definition of stakeholders is a problem, that can be changed up front, and people can participate. You know, you can participate. The alternate Saturdays and weeknights help that. You cannot participate if you have zero time. Maybe you can talk to neighbors and they can participate. Thanks.
Yeah, right here. Thanks. Hi, I'm Aaron Manders. I live on Dickinson Street, which is right off Springfield. And I just want to say thanks to the group who put this all together. And I want to speak in favor of having some stakeholders from outside the city and give a recent example for why that's important. Inman Square, I'm close to Inman Square, I'm close to Union Square, and Inman Square is completely redesigning, or Cambridge is completely redesigning Inman Square right now, and they actively sought out input and feedback from Somerville residents on how that wants to change. And without Somerville input, Springfield would be a one-way.
I know, but Cambridge didn't do it. So Somervillians came in and said, "You're not taking us into account."
Okay, so this board provides that opportunity that you weren't provided before, if you want to say it that way. Sure. But I want to say that was a community process that changed based on feedback from non-city residents. Okay, is that fair? And we want to have that same, I would like to have that same, I'm not on the board or anything, but I would like that process to be the same for Union Square. And I just want to second the gentleman who spoke for the open streets part, because I'm 100% with that.
Where do you want to go next?
Sure. I mean, if you want. My name is Andy Greenspan. I've been working with this group for a couple months now, and I just have a pragmatic question about the structure that in the debates we've had, didn't get answered. So the structure currently is divided by seats with different categories, and it was unclear to me whether you were representing that type of category by being elected to that seat, or if you're supposed to represent the whole neighborhood, but there are categories to get diversity, because the religious, charitable, et cetera, having someone from that group, I thought even if they're from that group, they're not supposed to be just representing charitable groups. I thought they were supposed to be representing the whole neighborhood, and it gets murky as to what their elected role is in that regard. And the other issue is, how will you work out how people can, sorry, let me think about this. Oh, how people are picking seats because different people overlap in different seats, and if there's like 10 people running for one category and like 5 people running for another, what if people sort of see that and then switch? Like, how are you going to prevent that sort of slate issue?
Okay. So again, I think the answer to your first question is yes, in terms of if you are on this board, you're representing all the stakeholders, the members and stakeholders in Union Square, and not just one specific group. So you would hear from everybody, and everybody would have access to you, and you would be able to support or, bring out the things that they want to have in the meetings. In the second part of your question, again?
The second part was dealing with picking seats and how you're going to know who's running for different seats, and can people sort of sneak and move around?
No sneaking.
No sneaking.
None. So the way we ensure that is that candidates have to fill out, submit a filing, essentially, as you would for running for anything, which will include 5 petition signatures from eligible members. We wanted people to do a little bit of work, but not too much work. You need to, on your application to be a candidate, you need to indicate which seat you're running for. And then what else do you have to do on that? You have to your proof of eligibility. So whatever those documents are for you. So does that answer your question, Andy? You have to pick it. You got to decide what you're running for and stick with it.
Hi, my name is Scott Heyman. I served on the CAC and the LOCUS, and I don't live in Union Square. I work for SCC as the real estate director, and I commend all you guys. I couldn't keep up. I fell off the workload about halfway through the work over at with your Saturday meetings and so forth. But I think Wig is a little bit correct that it really would be worthwhile to tweak I get the stakeholder inclusionary sort of approach here. I get it, and I think a lot of other people do too. That's an intention. But I think it'd be really worthwhile before going to the larger next public to look at tweaking it, giving a little more definition so it might be like live, work, receive services, right? Go to school perhaps, serve on a board that's active in Union Square. I think there a little more definition would be good. I would agree that I don't think you want necessarily every consumer of the farmer's market or every restaurant from here to Kingdom Come necessarily being able to just self-identify and say I'm a stakeholder, and it becomes incredibly unwieldy because my second observation is that typically the members are the most powerful aspect if you set it up this way of a nonprofit, right? So if your members become so large and so disparate and so here, there, and everywhere, and in fact you really value their input, then you're really down to like maybe a once-a-year meeting in which they might approve a budget or approve a set of policies and all that kind of stuff. But I don't see you guys envisioning that. I think you want members very much actively engaged, but then you lose your flexibility when you're actually trying to negotiate for something with a developer. You would want your board to be empowered to negotiate and make a decision and execute the understanding of what the membership has. So if you tweak the membership a little more, and I think it would make a huge difference. And then the last thing I'll say, I would tend to agree that I think one more homeowner on the group would make a huge difference, I believe, in terms of the composition of the board itself. And my question would be, is there an openness amongst the guys who've worked very hard? I know you mentioned having an amendment and putting it forward, but that actually illustrates the problem in a way. If people don't have a lot of time, but they have good thoughts about this and they care about it, if they put an amendment but they can't bring enough people to win the day, then what's the point? You know what I mean? So one more homeowner, tweak tweak the membership so it's still stakeholder oriented, right? And then ultimately, is there an openness to one more round of tweaks? Because I know, I'm on the Google group. Before you go to town to the general public.
For another 10 more minutes and continue this discussion. Okay, so this is less than a 2/3 majority vote here. But if somebody hasn't had a chance to speak it, so maybe we'll take any thoughts from folks, and then I wanted to describe a little bit like where we go from here, or people can speak. I don't know. But I see, Tom, you haven't spoken. Do you want to come up with the mic or just yell?
They have to get on the email.
I sure do. No.
Thank you. I know it's not easy being up there, so, and I know all the work that everybody's done. My name's Tom Bent. I was on the LOCUS committee, and I've been on the working group committee also. A couple of things. On the, I don't know if Sue, if you could pull up the structure again for a minute, and I wanted to go back to something that Esther had said earlier about on the Union Square business owner or worker. Was it your intention on that where a business owner would maybe delegate instead of the owner going to the meetings or representing him, he could delegate it to a worker, or would this be a separate item where just a worker could run?
I think that's the initial idea that, like, maybe the owner of the business who has left, right, with his family, couldn't spend all this time participating in the way that they needed to, but maybe they could put forward somebody to represent their business. But I'm not sure that that specific question was ever held by the group and answered. Like, could a market basket employee run as a worker in Union Square for the board? And right. I think there was some discussion that people wanted that. So it's a little bit more open than only business owners or their representatives, but that was the initial intent.
And the other question, one group I don't see here is a Union Square, say, commercial property owner. I'm not sure where they would fit in onto this, because they might not own a business, but they may own some property down in the square. How would you envision them being part of the structure?
Open seat.
So as an open seat. So even though they own...
If they don't, there's a number, or a business owner, is that a business? Potentially they could make the case that's a business.
Yeah.
But I don't, there's a number of categories that are not represented up there. This was, again, I can live with it middle ground. Okay. So that's a good point, Tom, that's not up there.
And then as far as the elected officials that represent the people of Ward 2 and Ward 3, how do they bring concern? Because that's where a lot of the concerns will probably come from. You know, a lot of the people that don't go to these meetings maybe not hear about it, but then when they start getting something, you know, they start finding something's wrong. Whoever those aldermen are going to be, how will the aldermen be able to come before the council to advocate for their constituents? How do you envision that? Because that's something I know we've talked about back and forth. It was decided that they wouldn't be part of the council at all, but I'm wondering how that would kind of translate.
So all of these meetings are public meetings that have to be announced in advance, and I think, and agenda items can be proposed from any member. So I see them kind of having a member role with a little bit more power, because they're elected officials. So I think obviously if this board is going to be effective at all, they're going to need to work closely with their alder people to move policy, public policy. So.
Yeah, no, a couple of people
But
asked me this
so
tonight.
I guess the point is it's not outlined in the bylaws, but I presume they will figure out a way to be sure that they're an active part of the council.
And the last thing would be, so I mean, there's been a lot of discussion tonight, a lot of good suggestions, and I would, what's your intention as far as going back, like on Saturday or next week? Are you going to take a real hard look at all this and then, you know, have another discussion and basically take what you hear tonight and kind of mix it into what we've kind of put together already?
Yeah, so I think that we've just heard a lot of really great feedback and definitely have a lot to think about, and that the working group, again, is an open group, and that the working group is going to need to take this and reflect on it and think about like what is, you know, and that I just recommend people come to the next working group meeting and talk about it, and then ultimately the public meeting and at that point I think it's like the official, hey, we got this, we're moving forward, and you know, please come on board. So
meeting details?
Sorry?
When is the meeting? Next meeting?
The next meeting is
The next meeting is this Saturday, 9 to 12 at the police station. And just to be clear, in order to, for a healthy process, we don't consider amendments that haven't been circulated on the listserv, because we want people to be able to consider them before they come to the meeting, and so that there are no surprise votes. So the PMO listserv is the one to send any suggested amendments.
Do it, Andy.
So that can be considered this Saturday.
Yeah, if you could sign in and indicate if you would like to join. Andy just said, should we ask if people want to join the listserv? Yes, if you want to join the listserv, sign in or put a star next to your name. There's a lot of emails. Please, join the listserv, participate in the discussion.
I'm strongly in favor of not saying any amendments against this.
So,